we are going to talk about methods that leaders and members of groups can use to make good decisions. We'll talk about the top 7. Some are better than others, and we're working out of Beebe and Masterson's book on communicating in small groups. I'll put a link to that in the description below. So let's get into the details. So let's talk about some overall considerations. It's best when you're working in groups to spell out the decision-making process ahead of time so everybody understands the roadmap. You don't want people confused about what method of decision-making you're using because it can cause the group to be very ineffective and maybe even cause some unnecessary stress. Randy Hirakawa, who is a researcher and professor at the University of Hawaii in Hilo, has been researching group decision-making for years, and his research shows that when groups have an explicit process they follow, that they spell out for everybody, the groups end up making more effective decisions. So knowing the various methods will help leaders and members be more effective in identifying the best process in any given situation. So let's go to number 1. Number 1 is decision by an expert inside the group. So sometimes as an internal member of the group who's an expert or has a particular experience or knowledge base on an issue, and the group will often look to that person for an extra perspective that they would not have themselves, and will often then defer to that person, turn to that person to make the choice. I was in a group once where the discussion was swirling for a while. The topic was on energy and innovation. And after a while, one of the guys spoke up and said, I used to work in an energy company. I did my research in graduate school on energy and alternatives. And everyone was like, oh, well, why don't you tell us what's going on? You could see his expertise there carry a lot of extra weight all of a sudden in the discussion. This can be a really efficient approach, but the group should still fully discuss the issue because you risk being dissatisfied with the outcome if you don't have a full discussion. So the expert doesn't just instantly make the decision. You listen to the expert, consider what the expert has to say, and then ultimately the group makes the decision together based upon that. Number 2, decision by an expert outside of the group. This is exactly the same, but sometimes issues fall outside of the group members' knowledge and experience in ways that they can't make, or they're unwilling to make a decision. So they will ask an expert, but someone from outside. So this is where consultants often come in, academic consultants, professional consultants. They will request that expert help, that outside help, to help then take that advice, and then the group can make a decision themselves. So the expert is not the decider. The group is the decider, but they're getting that advice from the person outside to inform the group's decision. And this can work, but it sometimes can give up that decision-making influence, and the group may lose valuable insight from its group members if they don't allow a full discussion beforehand before deciding. Number 3, averaging individual rankings or ratings. So I've used this one. This is where individual group members are asked to rank or rate possible alternatives or solutions. So let's say you are a hiring committee and you have to choose between 5 different job candidates, and they all might look pretty good on the surface. Everybody might feel like, okay, I can see them all working here. One way to do that is to have each individual member on the team rank them, let's say from 1 to 5, secretly, right? And then they end up sharing their scores and totaling up the scores to see who has the best score. Or if you're working on another kind of solution, maybe it's not about hiring people, it's another kind of alternative solution, what option comes to the top of the pile when it comes to everybody's individual rankings and ratings? Now, this is not necessarily a great way to make a final decision. You're not bound to the results, but you could say, why don't we do this? Why don't we rank and rate our alternatives here, see which ones come near the top, which ones go near the bottom. And it sometimes is a way to simplify the process. Like the group might all agree that 1 or 2 of the alternatives just shouldn't move forward, but there are another 2 or 3 that are the best ones. So the group can leave the lower options behind and continue to talk about the higher rated options. So it's a good way to get a discussion going, not a great way to routinely use to make a final decision. Number 4 is a random choice. This is not really a good one, but for a variety of reasons, groups will sometimes get stuck. Maybe they're not able to make a choice through some logical and thorough process. So random choice is where the group resorts to doing things like flipping a coin or picking a number or some other way to just randomly pick an alternative. I've seen this used in groups because sometimes the decision is just not that important. And people are like, I really don't care what we do. It doesn't seem to have a big impact. So why don't we just pick one? Who cares? Pick one and let's move on to more important priorities. It's not a good way to make meaningful decisions, however. So don't just, obviously, if you're in a group, don't just resort to flipping coins when you're talking about something important. Number 5, majority rule. This is where more than 50% of the members agree, so a statistical majority. This is often done by voting in some way. It could be a show of hands, yays or nays. It could be by secret ballot. It's a very commonly used method. It can be efficient, but it can leave voters in the minority, the less than 50%, very dissatisfied, and it can lead to unintended alliances over time. So you see this on reality shows, and you certainly see it in politics. Sometimes where there's a group that will come together that wouldn't ordinarily agree, but they come together on a particular decision because they want to form a majority for whatever reason and vote for that. And then they get their way. And that can often, in the long run, if you use this over and over again, create a lot of friction because people will end up grouping up and forming alliances, not really based upon the quality of the decision, but they'll do it based upon trading votes and office politics. So it can turn a little sticky, a little toxic, and it can sacrifice decision-making quality and long-term cohesiveness for the sake of getting any particular decision pushed through. Number 6, decision by minority. This is even worse. So sometimes a minority of group members, less than 50%, will make the decision. Essentially, they might be the most vocal, most dominant. They might rush a decision through before people can fully consider it. They might create potential problems in order to get their way. And sometimes they'll even use very strategic communication to frame an issue like you have to choose it. They might propose their solution really quickly and then challenge group members and say, does anybody have any objections? In other words, here's what we should do, any objections? And they might not give people enough time to process it. And now if they're speaking up, they might say, is that a problem? So now if I speak up, I'm talking about, yeah, I have a problem. It can really frame things in a negative way where in a positive way, you could say, what are the other alternatives? Get other voices in the mix. But if you frame any other voices speaking up as you're about to talk about a problem, then that can be a really manipulative way to push a decision through. This is even worse than decision by a majority because most of the people will be dissatisfied with this decision. And you might win the battle, as they say, but lose the war. So yeah, you might push one decision through, but it's going to cause a lot of resentment in the long run. So what you should do, of course, is use some of these other alternatives. This is not a good one. I would put this even worse than random choice because there are much more hurt feelings when you make decisions by minority. And number 7 is kind of the gold standard, decision by consensus. When this is done well, it's considered to be an ideal. That's when all group members can support a course of action. So it takes time and effort, but it often leads to high quality decisions because group members have to express their point of view, listen carefully, emphasize areas of agreement, combine and or eliminate alternatives. And so that's a very thorough process where people are really voicing their opinions to finally arrive at a widespread agreement among all group members. This doesn't always happen, but often through the discussion, you'll have a fallback position called the supermajority, where that's 2/3 or more of the group agrees on a direction. So you might have most of the group, overwhelming majority supporting a direction, where you have 1 or 2 holdouts for various reasons. I have often found that even a supermajority is a pretty good way to make decisions. It'll sometimes come down to those 1 or 2 people who still disagree to saying, well, you know what? I've said my piece. I feel like I've been heard. I don't agree that this is the best choice, but if that's what the group says, then I'm willing to go along with it. You often hear people say that, some version of that, when you have a supermajority. Almost everybody agrees. That's a pretty good place to be for many decisions. You also have to be aware of groupthink, however. Let's say you're pushing for consensus and you're like, let's all agree, let's all agree. Some people may not want to disagree because they don't want to fracture that harmony and cohesiveness. They might think something different and totally disagree in their mind, but not want to voice it because everybody's very concerned about maintaining group cohesion. So you have to be careful and make it a safe enough group so that people can disagree respectfully and voice their opinions and be heard without fear of causing all kinds of problems if there's some kind of disagreement. So some overall takeaways: strive for genuine consensus, not hyper-consensus, not groupthink. Allow for plenty of discussion to get all the issues on the table. Encourage high levels of participation from all group members so everybody is heard. And then discuss the advantages and disadvantages of options fully so everybody knows what they're getting into. And ultimately, we won't agree 100% of the time, but group members will feel valued and respected if the decision-making process was handled well. So, question of the day: which of these alternatives do you like the best for group leadership, group membership, and group decision making? I would love to hear your comments in that section below the video. I look forward to reading them there. Thanks, take care, see you soon.